let me open this panel. I'm first of all extremely happy to greet someone who hardly needs being presented here. You all know him, or at least you know who he is, Herman Van Rompuy, who became Belgian Prime Minister in 2009. And very shortly afterwards, he became the first permanent, or I would say full-time president of the European Council. When he became Prime Minister, people said in Belgium, we need Herman Van Rompuy. But then, fortunately or unfortunately, 3 or 4 months later, some important people, including Madame Merkel, decided that he was useful for Belgium, but he was even more useful for Europe. And so he became the first president. The second guest, who is coming a bit later, he's still in the plane. He accepted at last minute to come because Felipe González unfortunately fell ill. He was supposed to be with us today, and he couldn't, unfortunately, which is a real pity. But we have someone very interesting who's going to come. It's Enrico Letta, who was a prime minister in Italy between 2013 and 2014, who is the president of the Institut de Law, and who has a lot to say about this. He recently published a very important report. And then we've invited 2 young, dynamic academics in order to look a bit at to link the past to the present and the future challenges. We're going to ask some questions, but also make their statement. So let me first turn to Herman Van Rompuy. In the first, in our Europe chat, which we recently held and published, you were telling me how you were pressured into becoming the first president of the European Council. You didn't really have the luxury of a slow and smooth learning process because lots of things happened immediately when you became president of the European Council. So can you talk to us a bit about that experience?
That is a very personal experience. I was prime minister by coincidence, because my predecessor had to resign, and actually my predecessor became my successor, which is quite unique. And so I started the 30th of December as prime minister. I had my first European Council, informal political European Council, in March, under the Czech presidency. My neighbor was Pierre de Boissieu. And 1 month later, he came to my office telling me, you know, those who know Pierre de Boissieu, he said, Monsieur le Président, il faut que vous deveniez président du Conseil européen. And we talked about, and at the end I said, this conversation has never taken place. Because, and if it is revealed, I will deny it. Why? Because at that time, the Belgian politics was once again in a very turbulent stage, and you can be missed always. You can always be missed, but at some occasions you can be less missed than in other occasions. And that was my case in the Belgian context in 2009. But things happened, and I started to work, so to speak, the 1st of December. I took office the 1st of January, you remember? Yeah. I refused to go to Copenhagen, to the COP conference, and my intuition was, I would have said, once again, right, because it was a catastrophe.
That's why it was.
Yeah, it was a catastrophe. And so I started working the 1st of January, actually preparing the work ahead. I had 2 advices on the Greek crisis. I will not reveal the names. The first one said to me, there will be a crisis, a major crisis in the upcoming days and even before Christmas. So prepare. We were not aware of the gravity of the Greek crisis at that time. And another, really an authority, told me, we have 1 year. Because the collaterals that are given to Greece are sufficient to cover the year, and so you have a year. Beginning of January, it became very obvious that the crisis was coming closer and closer. And then I scheduled an informal political European Council, not on Greece, because the advice that was given to me was contradictory. We planned something very general, but then it became very clear that we had to speak on Greece. And that was my first European Council, I think the 11th of February 2010. Actually, what we decided there was the basis for all further actions. But it took us 2.5 years before that we get control over the Eurozone crisis. But then I discovered what the European Council was and why it played such a major role in the Eurozone crisis and even beyond until today. Of course, it was mentioned by Wolfgang, the European Council was already there in 1974, but as an institution and with a full-time president, it was created by the Lisbon Treaty. Why played the European Council a big role in the Eurozone crisis? First of all, because after some time it was clear there was no money in the European budget, there was only 60 billion. So all the money should come from the national budgets. And the national leaders represented in the European Council said, it's our money. We want to decide on our own money, which is not so uncommon. And there's a certain logic in it. So it's our own money. That's for the first reason. The second is that this was an existential crisis. Afterwards, there were other existential crises, an existential crisis about life and death. And Chancellor Merkel said rightly that the end of the Eurozone would have been the end of the European Union. I think she was right. So who can decide on life or death? It's Chefsache. It's an issue for the leaders. So because it was so, the stakes were so high that only those who had the strongest legitimacy, and the European Council had the strongest political legitimacy. You can argue about the European legitimacy, the national legitimacy. To court, the strongest political legitimacy belonged to the European Council. So they have to take the most important decisions. The third reason was that, and I speak now also as a former national politician, in a crisis you have automatically a concentration of powers. Somebody has to decide. And that was the European Council. So there are other reasons too, but that was the main reason. It was the main reason. So we felt immediately that we had to play a role. But there was a Eurozone crisis, but not all the members were members of the Eurozone. So at that time, only 17 out of the 28 were members of the Eurozone. So we had Eurozone summits gathering the 17. But the others, their economic fate also depended on the decisions taken by the Eurozone. So what happened was that we started as a Eurozone summit. Remember, Jim, you were there in March. We switched to a European Council. And actually, the statement of the Eurozone was corrected in the European Council. One incident, because we cannot always be serious, at a certain moment there was a discussion about the word economic governance. In French it is gouvernement économique. In English it is economic governance. It was an endless discussion. It was an ideological discussion and so on. So as a Belgian, I proposed at the end the end of the discussion, a Belgian compromise. For the French text, gouvernement économique, for the English version, economic governance. And everybody could live with it. It was strange, nobody understood it. It was ambiguous, but sometimes ambiguity and hypocrisy even helps. So we have to live with that. But more and more, it became clear that the other non-Eurozone members wanted to be part of the discussion and of the decisions. Another anecdote, and then I stop with anecdotes. At a certain moment, we had the European Council, and at the European Council, we decided that there should be a Eurozone summit on Thursday. The European Council took place on Sunday. But Poland, Donald Tusk, Prime Minister, David Cameron, Prime Minister at that time of the UK, said, no way, we want to participate. The others said, but it's our currency and our money. So we have to decide. Belgian compromise. We will have a European Council meeting ahead of the Eurozone summit for 1 hour. And then we switch to the Eurozone summit. And during that hour, everybody could take the floor, explain what his positions were. You have been seen in Brussels, which was also important. You have been seen in Brussels where the decisions were taken. And then we went on with the Eurozone summit. So it was all the time a balancing act. But we only could overcome this crisis with the help of the central bank in the summer of 2012. The Americans told us, but already in 2011, you have a central bank. Why do you not use the central bank? But it is only the central bank that can have the last word. The central bank was as divided at that time as the European Council. And then in June, we had this important council on the banking union. And then the European Central Bank said, because you took unprecedented decisions, we also have to do our job, and we will also take unprecedented decisions. And that was the turning point.
That was when Draghi, a few weeks later, said, we'll do everything which is needed. And believe me, it will be enough.
Mario Draghi came to me after the European Council of June and said, do you realize what you in the Council have decided? Because now I can act. Without the decision of the European Council, the ECB could not act. So this is a very special period. It dominated my 5 years term. There was only one issue, but that we can talk about it later on. That was Ukraine. Because the crisis on Ukraine started on Maidan Square, end of 2013, and with the association agreement. And it took us a lot of efforts to get it ratified by the 28 at that time. We even had to ratify it in 2 times. First, the political part of the association agreement, and then the free trade agreement. There was no logic in it. Yeah, there was a certain logic. But the main reason was that the European Council was divided between those who had a very harsh position against Russia and those who still believed that we can make a deal. But in May, we all, 28, ratified the whole of the association agreement. And that for Ukraine, it was a clear signal that they belonged to the European family. And the fight began. The war started in the eastern provinces. Crimea was annexed in the slipstream of our decision. 13,000 were killed before the Russian invasion already. The war started with the association agreement concluded between the EU and Ukraine. in the spring of 2000.
Thank you very much, Herman. I think this was really fascinating. I will ask you in a second if you have questions, but there's one point I wanted to pick up. When you say, because it's really important to understand the EU, that at some stage, when the going gets really rough, you need the heads of state and government. That is why the European Council was created. Now, sometimes people present this as being the European Council doing things it shouldn't do because others could do it better. But no, the European Council fixes the orientations. But, and I think you alluded to it because you mentioned the importance of the interplay with the central bank, for instance. The European Council can, of course, not work without the Commission, without all the others. So could you just say us a few things about how you saw this and how you saw your role in the European Council in relation also to the Commission, the Parliament?
With the Commission, I had no international experience before becoming President of the European Council. You have to know this. I was a national politician with intellectual interest, but I had no experience at all. But I had an experience in the Belgian context of dialogue, palavercultuur. You have to see each other, to talk to each other, to create confidence, and so on. So the first thing I did was to say to José Manuel Barroso, we will see each other every week. And we will have each time an open discussion. You explain your concerns, your plans, and I do the same. And we created a relation of trust. Of course, we are different personalities. We are all different. But it worked. It worked. And so when the Greek crisis erupted, there could have been tensions. There were tensions between the ECB and the Commission on Greece, already there. But there could have been tensions between me and the Commission and the Commission President. It didn't happen. The European Council gave me the task to work on a new governance structure for the Eurozone. I said, I thank you. It's an honor. Normally, it's a task for the Commission. But I will not do this without the Commission. And I did the same 2 years later when they asked me to draft to make proposals for a genuine economic and monetary union. They asked me to do the job, and again I said I will not do this without the Commission. So we considered each other not as rivals. We were in the same boat, and we are fighting for the same European cause. It sounds a little bit idealistic. It wasn't.
Especially after this.
It wasn't. And I said the same to the European Parliament, who was still fighting against the European Council because it had no control on the European Council. We were not accountable to the Parliament. And my thesis was with Jerzy Buzek and later on, but more difficult is with Martin Schulz, we are not rivals. We are not rivals. The crisis is too big. It is an existential crisis. The people are asking us afterwards, what is your solution? They will not ask who was the most handsome in the room, and that's obvious who was the most handsome. But they will not ask that kind of question. It is the Europe of the results. There's a very simple approach, but it is the only one. It's the only one. And so with the Commission, it went well. And a symbol of this non-rivalry was that when the European Union received the Nobel Peace Prize in December 2012, we were the three of us were on the stage. With the repartition of the roles, of course, because everybody has, according to the treaties, everybody had its own responsibilities, but we were all there. We were all there. And the 27 leaders were there, the 28, with one exception. David Cameron didn't show up. It was a Nobel Peace Prize. Nick Clegg was there, the Deputy Prime Minister, but it was a very clear signal that something could happen. We never imagined that they would leave, but it was not normal. It was not normal. You should be there because you are part of the war, and because you are part of the war, you are part of the peace process.
Thank you. I'll turn to Ilke and then Sophia, if you have one or two remarks and questions for Herman Van Rompuy. Ilke.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I will take a minute also to present myself. This is Ilke Teuger. I'm the Director of Global Policy Center and Professor of Geopolitics of Europe at IE University Spain. And I traveled from Madrid today to celebrate TEPSA's actually 50th anniversary, because I'm not that veteran, but I'm still a board member in my second mandate. So I couldn't miss in the world this party here today. So thank you very much all for coming, and it's a great pleasure to be at this panel together with Herman Van Rompuy, Jim, Sophie, my dear friend, and hopefully Enrico Letta as well, if he may arrive. Actually, I want to pick up on this point on European Council has the utmost legitimacy in times of crisis, because I really find this very, very important, because right now we are at a point where it's not just a moment of crisis, it's a moment of transition. And when we talk about transition, we have the green transition, tech transition, and at the same time, demographic transition. That requires a key moment of defining what the priorities are and how we will finance them. I think we are at a point, really, because every conversation about European integration starts with a crisis point. No, it's like we have been in crisis the entire 21st century. Then it goes to how we should reform, how we should move forward. This is how we advance in conversations about European integration. But since today we are bringing into the debate the role of the European Council, I really wanted to bring out the role of the leaders in the European Council in agreeing on what priorities are there for the European Union and how we will finance them. And I have a problem, and I have a question. This is actually going to be my question to Mr. Van Rompuy, that these leaders are legitimately elected leaders of member states, but as representatives of their political parties, their utmost goal is to be re-elected. And right now, in an environment of transition and drastic transitions, a change of economic model, a change of production model, change of industrial strategy, change of defense strategy, I really wonder how we will square that circle. That legitimately elected leaders of the European Union, that would honestly, as any politician look for another term, can put away their differences and work for the greater good in the European Union. I genuinely wonder this, and I really would like to see, because you have been, in addition to accidentally Prime Minister, as Secretary of State for Finance and Minister for Budget, so you know how bloody the MFF conversations are, or any budget conversations are. And we will enter, when the elections are over and when we have the new legislation, into a period where the member states will fight each other, blood and tears, to keep the best parts of the budget that they benefited them the most. And this will all happen in a moment of transition. So I appreciate the role that the European Council plays. I appreciate the role the legitimately elected leaders play. But I really wonder, in a period where we are in a highly complex, insecure, volatile geopolitical environment, where we question the DNA of the European project. No, it's like, is this still a peace project? If we are going through the common defense procurement, if we are increasing the budget, if we are just trying to decide on how to move forward if the Russian aggression on Ukraine moves towards the territory of Ukraine, territory of the European Union, are we still speaking about the same project that we have discussed in 20th century? And one final comment, because I know Jim wants us to give back the word to Herman Van Rompuy and pray for Enrico Letta to arrive, but just one final point. The European Council will discuss the strategic agenda in June meeting. And there's a leaked version of the strategic agenda, which I carefully compared to what was agreed in Granada, because Spain holds the presidency of the European Council, and we have worked very much on this. And do you know what is absent between the leaked version and the version that was agreed in Granada? Green transition, social Europe. So we are entering into a period where, as scholars of European integration, think tankers, analysts everywhere in Europe, we should definitely start asking questions about what kind of European project we want, how we will move forward, what would citizens want, and how could leaders respond to these wishes from the citizens without blame shifting to Brussels all the time.
Thank you very much. I think that was more than a question, but a very good question too.
Question and remarks
Sophie.
altogether.
Sophie
Yes.
is from the Law Institute.
Yes, thank you so much for the invitation and great to see you all here. Actually, it's perfect because I think it very much fits with what I was going to say. So I arrived here at Brussels 5 years ago, and I think it was interesting because I was working in Berlin before, and from a national perspective, you hear a lot from the Commission, you hear a lot about the European Parliament, you never hear a lot about, well, you hear about the European Council meetings and summits, but you don't hear much about the institution it has become, whether the Council of the EU and the European Council. And I think it's interesting because once you move to Brussels, you see that what was a black box has the strongest political legitimacy, is the one pushing forward the decisions, especially in times of crisis. And what I would like to do, because I'm a think tanker, we're often asked to provide recommendations or answers, I'd like to look forward and to think about what is needed from the European Council, in my view, to move forward when we do have such amazing crisis, which mean that we have a transformation that is much more than just a punctual crisis. And that said, I mean, the European Council has a lot of advantages, which I don't want to kind of go into, I think we did. But I think there's a lot of improvement and space to grow, as you say, to put it nicely. And the first is that there is really a lack of anticipation of crisis. So it's a very good body where you find emergency solutions, in my view, but there has been a complete lack of foresight and a complete lack of understanding of where are we heading, as you mentioned, Ilke. And I think that's probably due to design flaw. And that's also linked to the second point, which is they're unable to deal with more than a crisis at a time. I mean, because a crisis is a crisis, you need to deal with it. But that means what do you do in a situation where you do have systemic crisis, such as the climate crisis, at the same time then an energy crisis, an economic crisis, and a geopolitical one. So I'm wondering how can we have a more strategic foresight and be able to deal with a multitude of crises at the same time without changing priorities every 5 years? Because as you mentioned, the climate crisis is still there. It's not on the strategic agenda anymore. Where are we heading? I mean, we know that we have climate targets 2030, 2050. They're not going away. If we don't continue with the Green Deal by enforcing it, but also by having new legislation, I'm wondering where we're going. And we all know that the strategic agenda will have huge implications for the political guidelines of the Commission. That's the second point. The third point is that it's rather short-term than long-term. I mean, that goes into the strategic foresight one. But also we saw it a lot with Ukraine, I think. We really saw unity with the sanctions against Russia. I thought it was a wonderful moment where we finally could see that, the EU is delivering. But now we really struggle to have a joint approach. We are struggling with defense procurement. We are struggling with, financing. We saw also how France and Germany are into petty fights when it comes to the European Peace Facility. That's not the kind of Europe I was looking for, and I wonder what role the European Council can play and its president, and the next one hopefully, to kind of have a better implication in that, or make sure that we have more joint strategic approaches. And that's my last point. I'm French and German, and it's quite interesting because I think Germany especially had this approach of inclusion instead of ambition, to make sure that we don't have multi-speed Europe. And at the moment, I'm wondering, why don't we use multi-speed Europe much more to integrate more? And that would also mean getting rid of Orban's vetoes, which I think are a huge issue, as we saw in the last few months and now years. So I'm wondering how much we can use that kind of, à la carte approach, which has its negative effects. I'm not saying it's the best way forward, but is that not the only way forward we have? And maybe that's my question also to you, Mr. Van Rompuy. I actually have one more point. Sorry, I'm going to use that mic that I have now. One more point, because I think that's also why you invited me here, Jim, because I wrote a book about power, and that's my last point. But I think it's an important point to kind of think about how we think about power in the European Council. I've done research, the book is only in German for those who speak German, about the fact that we still have an understanding of power that's relatively regressive for democracies. It's very much based on a transactional approach, so I give you this, you give me this. It's very much in a win-lose situation, so I win when you lose, and you cannot win if I lose, that kind of way. And I wonder how we can change that concept of power, especially within the European Council, because it's absolutely necessary for national decision makers to realize that they have an interest in having more collective power and power to do stuff instead of power over. And I feel that, you know, with the shift that we see towards the far right, it's very much getting even more regressive, even more traditional of, I will bring back to my national citizens Germany winning in the European Council, rather than understanding that a compromise that we achieved is still better than no compromise, and that we still profit from having a common European interest rather than having just a national interest. And I think that's a little bit the kind of power understanding that I would wish to see in the European Council, but I wonder if we can get there eventually. Voilà.
That was brilliant. Thank you, both of you. Herman, the difference between the civil servants like me and the think tankers is that we pretend we bring solutions, although we don't actually, but they only bring problems. So now you can choose. There are many things they said, and I really wonder how you're going to handle this.
First of all, I left political life 10 years ago, almost centuries ago, and the world changed dramatically since then. So you have to take this into account. Be mild when you are evaluating my answers, my reply. First of all, yes, the European Council is formed by heads of state or government, all elected. We are in a democracy. Yeah. So you can. There is no other institution that that has that legitimacy, and having that legitimacy, you got to be elected. You have the European Commission, but you know what the competences of the Commission are, and even the European Commission. And now I'm speaking very softly. They want to be re-elected too. And it's not the first time that this is happening. I can give you many other examples where even the proposals the Commission is making are inspired by the ambition to have a second or even a third term. I know it is different because in the European Council you are with 28. You have not only federal elections, you have in a lot of states, federal states, you have regional elections. Regional elections can be as important as national elections. I remember in March 2010, we postponed a decision in the midst of the Greek crisis because there were elections taking place in Rhineland-Westphalia. And we had to wait until Sunday evening before when the ballot boxes were closed, before we could proceed. So I know that it's complicated, but my point is that even the European Commission is not free from those concerns. For me, the best thing for the European presidency of the European Commission is the model of the presidency of the European Central Bank. 7 years, 5 years, not renewable. Then you are really independent. Because the Commission is more dependent than most people think. Mm-hmm. They are dependent because for the implementation of their proposals, they need the Council and the European Council. La Commission propose, le Conseil dispose, and they need the European Parliament. The European Parliament can vote on a non-confidence motion. It happened once, or on the brink of happening. You know,
Don't talk about it.
No, I know. I was alluding to 20 years or even more ago. So the Commission is not so independent as they pretend to be. But the European Council, you are absolutely right, they are sometimes hampered by the fact that there are elections. But when you enter the room of the European Council, I will not say that you become another person, but there is a transformation of your behavior. You know that you have to compromise. Even those from a big country who have an absolute majority, they know that they have to make a deal. Compromise is the essence of the European Union. I still remember that Obama once said, compromise, this nation, the United States, is built on compromise, bipartisan compromises. And that's all the more true for the European Union. So when you enter the room, you know you have to compromise. When we are participating in a discussion, and for sure, Rico.
Please. Welcome.
So when you engage in discussion in the European Council, you are rapidly aware that there is a group dynamic. You can play your role and express let's say the concerns of your own country and the interests of your country, but there is a group dynamic. And the most dramatic moment I ever lived through there was the Slovak Prime Minister, who said, was a lady, Iveta Radikova. And she said, look, I cannot agree on behalf of my government, but I will not stop your decision because it's too important. I forgot what stage it was.
To help Greece.
To help
package for Greece.
The package for Greece. I know it was an important one. And she said, and I will not stop you. So I join the majority, but I know that if I go back to Bratislava, it will be the end of my government. And she added to us, the end of my political career.
Yeah. And it was.
And it was. It was a circus because there was a vote of no confidence, and the new government came, didn't veto. They joined the decision that Iveta shared with us. So they show how that the group dynamic and the sort of. Some are saying the Commission is fighting for the European interest and all the rest is fighting for the national interest. Yes, you start, of course, with the national interest, but at the end of the day, the sum of it could be the European interest. And so you never forget that you have to agree, and then of course the sum of all this is what is called the European interest. That's just a few reflections on what you said, starting from you have all the time elections. So this is in the room of the European Council, you have some kind of other dynamic. A second point that
there were many other points.
Yeah. No, there were two main points.
Yeah.
One of the elections and
the financing
The
priorities.
financing of
and all that.
priorities in the budget.
Yeah, that was your question. Yes, the priorities, but yeah. That's the European budget is a good and a bad example. Because the European budget, we made it in 2000, beginning of 2013, I think. It was in the Monti government. Yeah. That is what you call the pocket calculator approach often. and you have to agree, so it is a give and take. But the European, you can do this, why? Because it is an investment budget. And an investment budget is, you take a budget away from climate change and give it to research, but that is money that people haven't had in their pockets. That's the definition of an investment. That's always related to the future. A national budget, that's about social security. Also, when you cut in social security, then the pensioner or the fathers and mothers or the sick, they have to have less allowances or they have to pay more. So that's a much more complicated exercise than a national budget. Because there people are directly concerned. That is less the case in the European budget. I still remember at the end of 36 hours of negotiations, I said, the shop is closed. And I had an ovation of my colleagues because enough was enough. Enough was enough. One of the ways to escape this constraint of 1% is, of course, what was decided? 20. And we will not avoid this in the future. If you have to deal with many crises and many challenges, and you have to put all this in this 1%, which is ridiculous because the total volume on average of public expenditures in the European Union is 50%. I will not say that the European budget is 1/50 of the totality of the budgets in the European Union, but I'm not so far away from this assessment. So this making an appeal to the European capital markets and get rid in times of more than transition, it's even more than transition, getting rid of this ideology of the balanced budget. Even Adam Smith was agreeing that for investment you can have a budget.
You should say this to the German finance minister.
I use now the strongest argument possible.
Sophie will translate this into German. Thanks. I want to bring in Enrico Letta. Thank you, first of all, for having joined us. What happened is that Enrico Letta found out that there was this thing happening with Felipe González and Herman Van Rompuy, and so he said, oh, I will be shortly in Brussels, I come by. What then happened is that Felipe González couldn't come, so we thought, well, what about Enrico Letta? So in other words, no good deed ever goes unpunished, because now you have to do some work for us here. I will not summarize what was said before. I would simply say that, first of all, that you were Prime Minister in 2013 and 14, which is the period where Herman Van Rompuy talked about quite a bit. So maybe tell us a bit how this happened when you first came to the European Council and what the atmosphere was. But secondly, because Ilke asked this question, which I thought was very interesting. We're now in a situation, we have so many things to settle. Everything seems to be a priority. How can the European Council and the EU decide on priorities? And how do we finance it? And I say this because you have recently published a very important report, which was commissioned by the European Council, and which is about the single market, but we talk quite a bit about financing and capital markets union. So if you can sort of link the two, it's a bit complicated what I'm asking you, but there we are, please.
So, thank you so much. I'm very sorry because this presence was a little bit complicated and I had some 45 minutes delay of my train from Paris. And unfortunately I have a meeting on the single market with Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein in half an hour. And so I'm very sorry. in reality, I wanted to be there to listen Herman and Felipe. That was my because I have so big we say respect for Herman first of all, but also for Felipe, because I had the opportunity to work with Herman. And I was really very impressed in the way in which he managed the Council in a very complicated period, because we have also to consider that the moment in which the President of the European Council started was, I think, the most complicated time ever in European history. It was 9, 10, 11. And I was really impressed by wisdom, very pro-European approach, because I think we are pro-European not only when we, say pro-European things, but also when we are able to organize compromises to get one step more. That is more complicated because, of course, the European Union today is a very complicated architecture, a very complicated puzzle with different approaches, and today more than yesterday, European Council at 28, that was yours in the end when Croatia entered, is a European Council really very complex issue. Maybe I would like to say one word about the very strange coincidence that yesterday I was in Paris and I was invited by the Fondation Valéry Giscard d'Estaing because it was the 50th anniversary of the election of Giscard d'Estaing. Okay. And you know very well there's a connection between the two topics, because one of the topics that we discussed yesterday was the fact that Giscard and Helmut Schmidt invented the European Council in 1974. The European Council didn't exist before, and the European Council became, at the beginning, a very informal event, an informal gathering, trying to find the shape and the correct role. So many years, decades, before landing in Lisbon, because that was the point. Landing in the Lisbon Treaty with a regulation, I would say very light regulation, but many decades without knowing very well what was in the rules, the role of the European Council. And then I think that makes really unique the European Union, because probably the most important political body is the less regulated political body. That is maybe something that we have to think about regulation, over-regulation, and so on. Yesterday, discussing with many other people this topic, the most important part of the reasons why the European Council was invented, it was a sort of ownership on shoulders of the leaders of national countries, not allowing them to say it's not my business. It was just a decision of bureaucrats, or no, it's your business first. Then you have to take ownership. So, in my view, the true word of the European Council is ownership, responsibility. That is the key issue. Of course, you can run and you can use this term, you can overuse this term. So ownership can be a property, sort of the way to use it, maybe in excessive way. But the true point and the reason why the European Council is still important, it is this part of ownership. Is to say that we need, at the end of the day, that the leaders of national governments are able to take responsibility, collective responsibility for what we have to do, and is the only way to unblock and to unleash sometimes some energies. Of course, it's not easy to find a way to we say, to have a good equilibrium. I can tell you, Herman, I was really impressed 1 month ago when I entered the room of the European Council 10 years later, because I was asked to present the report at the European Council meeting. As you know, it's a great privilege to enter the European Council without being a member of the European Council. And I was impressed by the physical shape of the building, because I had the feeling that something has changed in terms of distances, and today the table is bigger. That was my feeling. It's bigger, I think, because of COVID. So I think they put some distance among the different leaders, but the consequence of that is that from one side to the other side is more than from here to the last one. I can understand what is your face expressions, but not so much, because you are very far, I'm very far, and I think it is not the right way to have a room where you have to see what are the expressions of the other people. Otherwise, it risks to be a place where you read a text prepared in advance, but there's no interaction. So I think the topic about interaction and what you said about constituencies and the fact that the European Council is the place where things are happening and this ownership happens is, in my view, one of the most important parts. I strongly believe that this problem of priorities and the relationship with the decisions on finance is really very complicated, but it is complicated also because in the European Council you don't have other people in the room. And I don't know what is Herman's take on that, but I don't think it is I'm not completely convinced that this is a plus. Not to have anyone in the room. You have only the 27 plus the 2, plus maybe the Secretary General of the Council, and
Secretary General of the Commission,
and maybe also the Foreign Service.
For foreign relations, you have the
foreign relations too.
So you're President of Coreper.
Yeah. So the key point is that you have to discuss about the budget. That is a very complicated issue, very technical issue. Is it possible to do it? But this is a question, Herman, to you, because you had this. Is it possible, really possible, to have the good discussions and to have the good results of these discussions without having the people, the experts in the room on that topic? That is, for me, a big question mark.
Can I say something on that? Because I have a different view on this. I sat in many European councils. I think with 27 or 28, you come to 54 people around the table. That's the first problem. There are too many people. And I think so it was better. The discussions became much more like you said they should be in a closer circle. And don't forget that they have dinner together. They really sit together. The second reason is that traditionally it was the foreign ministers. Our foreign ministers are of no use when you talk about the budget, about agriculture, about transport, about anything else. And so in order to have the experts, then you would have to change according to the subjects, the ministers. It would destroy, in my view, the nature of the European Council. So I beg to differ. I don't know what Herman thinks.
Yeah, but I think that Enrico was also alluding to experts in the room to advise. Actually, in the discussions of the European budget, you have a meeting with the leaders in the beginning and at the end. And in the meantime, it's all bilateral. And so many prime ministers are accompanied by the experts because it is a complicated issue. So for the budget, that's not an issue. The reason I just mentioned. For other topics, of course, you are You are alone. You are alone. But the discussions, and you know it, are mostly what we call political. That does not mean that you don't care about the details and the operational character of the conclusions, but it is mostly a political discussion. Then you have to take your own responsibility. I never entered the room of the European Council after having this strange experience. I had that experience, this feeling that you are too far away from each other, when the one meeting we had in September 2010 with the foreign ministers.
The foreign ministers.
So we were then with 28 multiplied by 2, with 56. That was not a meeting anymore. That was a crowd. And so nobody was interested. By the way, the foreign minister didn't take the floor. So we kept that experience and said, now we did the experience. It was a concession from my side. Never again. Never again. And so we had that. And we had the dinners in the evening, the European Council. Then you are very close. And then you feel that dynamic of the group much more than when you're in this ancient room, and I guess in the new rooms too. Just one word about that. That was a topic I forgot.
Yes.
About short-term and long-term.
Yes.
That's why we have the Commission. The Commission has to remind us on the longer-term implications of what we decide and developing long-term views. And that's precisely what they are fully in their role when they assume that kind of role. And it's not a coincidence that the Green Deal is a Commission initiative endorsed in some way by the European Council. And there are also many other issues. The last 10 years, not involved, but you can see it. That and this interplay between elected people, effectively more concerned by the short term, and the Commission in its role, not only focused on the long term, but also on the long term. This is interplay between those two approaches that can be very fruitful. And don't think that a politician is never thinking in the long term. That is really a mistake, as if we are obsessed by the next elections. And I was in governments that took tremendously unpopular measures. No chance to get elected with those measures. No chance. But we did it. We did it. So you should not fall into this caricature. I don't say that you are alluding to it. This caricature that there are some people who are the wise men and really intelligent ones who think at the longer term, and also poor politicians that try to get re-elected and elected and focused on the short term. That's simply not true. That's simply not true. Of course, it's very helpful when there is somebody in the room who reminds you longer term perspective. But the politician is perfectly capable of doing so. When we worked to become a member, it was in the Hane government in my country, to get a member of the Eurozone, we were really focused by the long term. And we didn't care about the elections. We won the elections. Because a reward from time to time exists in politics. And, not always, but we lost many times more than we won. But at that, when you take unpopular measures and the people can see the result of those measures, which is not always the case, but when this happens, they can even reward you. Sure. And we did it because we were anticipating what would happen if we were not a member of the Eurozone. So the long term is not always absent in the room, but the Commission, its role is more to work in the bigger picture.
Thanks very much. Yes, please. Yes, someone's wanting to intervene. Look, we are pressed by time, and I think, Enrique, you have to...
But
please, come in. Yeah.
I have a very unconventional final word. That is the following one. There's another important aspect of the European Council, that is the place where the European Council happens and takes place. My guess is that it's not a good point to completely eliminate the European Council meetings in the countries.
In member states.
In the member states. I don't think it's a good choice. It's not a good choice to concentrate everything here in Brussels. I think this idea of ownership, also ownership of countries, of the country of the presidency, is something that has some good aspects. It is not negative, because it's the way for, first of all, for the people not to say Brussels decides.
Yeah.
Because this is a very negative, in general terms, that is very negative for Brussels first, because it gives Brussels all the negative bureaucratic Moloch aspects, and I think it's very negative. At the same time, is a way to share ownership that is one of the most important reasons and missions of the European Council. I really pay tribute to the way in which Herman worked, because he was so good in sharing ownership and not having only for him, but sharing ownership. That, in my view, that is so crucial, because I think is his role to remind every moment to the leaders that they are both national leader and European leader. They are not there representing their country. They are there representing their country and being leader, collective leader of the European Union. And I think this part is absolutely crucial. And the true problem of the European Council is not, not always we have this idea of the two together. Usually when you have a gathering of people around a table, you think that you are there to represent your country. But this is a place that is different from the others. You are there as a Council of Ministers. You are not there just representing the agriculture because you are Minister of Agriculture. You are part of a collective, I would say, leadership that is a Council of Ministers. And the European Council is that, and the most important part is making possible that it happens.
Thank you very much indeed, and I very much look forward to our Europe chat, where we can continue some of those issues, and which we will then share with everybody. Many, many thanks for having come by. It was great. Thank you. So we are pressed by time, so what I suggest now is the following. I pass the floor to the two ladies to make a few remarks or questions, relatively quickly, please. Then I open the floor to questions from the audience, a few, but questions, no long statements. And then I would ask Herman to conclude everything in one fell swoop at the end. So, please, go ahead.
First of all, thank you very much for all the responses, really. It's a pleasure for us to be able to ask questions. Actually, I want to take on your point on the national leaders are also European leaders, and they are not just thinking about short term, but also there are some visionaries thinking about long term. That might be true, but I'm really worried that in this environment of polarization, and extreme polarization in our member states right now, that this is going to be more and more difficult. Because the governments in the national arena and then on the European arena, they will be pushed to take decisions just serving to their own constituencies, because the concept of greater good and the concept of European public good is going to be contested more and more again. So I really wanted to take on your point, but I think I have, at this point in time in European integration, my doubts about that. And the second point, I also wanted to follow up on the role of the European Commission and the European Council, and you're extremely right. And this is correct when the presidents of the two most important institutions are not fighting each other or like looking after their careers all over. So this is again, maybe this is on the ideological, theoretical point of view, it's a positive thing, and it's a division of labor between institutions. They were created that way. But when we look at the actual politics of today, I'm really doubtful if the European Commission can play that role and if the European Council leaders would act as you have described. Having said that, as my last question, I have a rather journalistic one. Now we are entering to 2024, finalizing the elections and entering into the top jobs, and then we will have a new legislation. What would be the three most important? If you want to focus on one, it could also be one for me. Most important issue that the European Council and the European Union has to get right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sophie.
Yes. So now that the president of the Institut Jacques Delors is gone, I will have to take on that role and remind everyone that also, because we talk a lot about the European Council, but the Commission is also quite an important institution. And I'm wondering, as you said, like populism is on the rise. I also wonder about the moral duty of national leaders to understand that collective good that they have, and that they, when they enter the room, should understand that they have also European interest at heart, as Letta said it. And I'm thinking that sometimes it might be good also to have a strong Commission president and to strengthen supranational institutions, especially in a time when we do have far rights coming to power. I'm not saying that the European Parliament is not going to be influenced by the far right, far from it. We see what's going to happen in the elections in 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Yeah. 9th of May, 6th to the 9th of June. But it might be a good time also to think about how the Commission can be strengthened in such a position, knowing that the European Council might turn into something which is not very nice, especially looking at the French elections in 2027. And I'm wondering how the institutions can prepare themselves properly, going back into the strategic foresight when we have Marine Le Pen potentially elected French president. That's just a remark. I actually have a number of questions, but I'll keep it to 3. The first one...
That's very generous.
I know. The first one is on I think it was you, Herman van Rompuy, who said about the strategic agenda, sometimes you have to be ambiguous and even hypocritical, and that's okay. I'm wondering to what degree that is good, knowing that we saw the leaked strategic agenda, the lack of, social Europe and climate change. I'm wondering how far can you go when you know that the polarization is so high? At what point do we just lack a common approach and are not able to take decisions anymore? I'm kind of thinking that looking at it and being like, ooh, this is like really the lowest common denominator that you have. The second question is, because we haven't talked about it yet, which I think is fascinating, about consensus and QMV. And I think you mentioned when we discussed it for my book, that in migration policy you switched from QMV to consensus because it was such a polarizing issue. But I'm wondering, especially with enlargement, how are we going to work together? Because I'm always fascinated that they find decisions at 27. I find it's a surprise, it's astonishing, but how are we able to do that at 36? And the last one is also because I was a little bit involved in the European political community, as Ilke is, and wonder what kind of relationship there could be also between those two, knowing that there's been a lot of criticism of the European political community, but I still think that it is worth having that kind of infrastructure for dialogue, which also has that ownership because it also moves around, and I'm wondering how the two institutions could potentially work together as well. Just that.
Thank you very much, Sophie. And I just wanted to say, I read German, so I read her book. It is really very interesting, I must say. So learn German quickly so that you can read it, or you get it translated, which will probably be quicker.
I'm waiting for that.
Now, I will open the floor for 3 or 4 questions. It's always the same. We never have time for this. But real questions, please, because so 3 or 4 questions, and then Herman Van Rompuy will come. So there's a gentleman over there. So we take 4 questions, let's say.
Very fast. You said that 27 is a good fit for a room, that 50 something is a bit too much. What do you think about 36? Is it the right number? Thank you.
That was excellent. Second question. As
No pressure.
pointed.
No
thing.
pressure.
Yes, the gentleman over there.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jared Rexler at the Canadian Mission to the EU. I think it was Paul Henri Spack who said once in the day there's 2 types of states in Europe, the small ones and those who don't know it yet. So I'd be interested in the concept of not only moving from common responsibility, but common leadership. I think the 2 ladies on the panel have made excellent points. I think it's no longer a luxury to be able to just muddle through. There needs to be vision, there needs to be strategy, because we're in a world of great power competition. And President Van Rompuy, you came into this position without a lot of preparatory work, but you've had 10 years to think about the job. I'd be very interested in what in hindsight, what were the lessons that you've learned over the years about your very important time in office? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there a third one? There is a gentleman over there. No ladies? I'll be blamed afterwards by Marian. I only pass the floor to men.
Well, thank you very much. Victor Van Horn. A quick question. We saw today, I think yesterday, Mr. Macron and Mr. Scholz, they joined up in the Financial Times. A lot of the things Mr. Letta said in his great report. But now being for nearly 13 years a lobbyist in Brussels and interacting a lot with the Council of Formation, what strikes me always is you get those great statements at high level, but when you see in specific Council formation, civil servants from different ministries, from member states behave, there's always a significant delta between what their leaders say and what they do in specific files. How are we going to bridge that gap? How are we actually going to get this going in a much more coordinated way?
Thank you very much. And a last question. But it's not obligatory. We have quite a lot, actually. So I think we'll close it here. I think they're very, very good questions. I mean, just to recapitulate 1 or 2, the question of the level, European level, and the polarization effect on the European level is an important one. The journalistic question, the 3 most important things to do is something maybe you can address. The question of how to strengthen the Commission, and then I think you have yourself. So I'll leave it to you.
Okay. Stop me when I'm too
Yeah, I think it's good. We were supposed to finish at 4 o'clock, so you have at least 10 minutes.
Ooh.
I could ask one more.
So I belong in some way to the old world where there was less polarization.
Yeah.
So I'm often asking myself, the European Council, you have known, does he still exist? But I'm surprised. I'm each time surprised. First of all, we have less we have non-populist government in Poland. So there's we had 2 populist governments, and now we have 1. You can say, of course, and Italy.
Yeah.
For me, the big surprise is that, and I'm not giving you any judgment, and don't think that you belong to the EPP and you're reaching out to ECR, nothing to do with that. I'm surprised that the Italian government, with the composition still has, subscribed to the European Pact on Asylum and Migration, knowing that migration is the key issue for far-right parties, and that they even agreed with the new budgetary rules, the European I'm not even speaking about Ukraine and all those things. For me, it's another example of when you enter the room of the European Council, you become a different person. I'm not over-optimistic either, so don't let me say what I don't want to say. But it's the least thing you can say is it is surprising. I agree with 2027. If there something is happening, then that could be a game changer. Game changer. But we are not there yet. We are not there. French politics is full of surprises. Don't forget that Macron was elected against everybody, coming from the Socialist Party. He received him as Minister of the Economy in the government of Hollande, that he won the presidential elections, and that the party that didn't exist, 1 month later, they had an absolute majority in the French Assembly. We'll see if Le Pen thinks that she is already in the Élysée. It's too soon. But I agree with you. Polarization is a big issue. And that's an issue for the nation states, and it is an issue for Europe as a whole, because Europe is also the sum of the member states. Exactly. Not an abstract body. So that, let's hope that this group dynamic still works, but there are limits to that, and 2027 is a possible limit. 3 teams. What I'm saying now is, I'm answering with a commonplace to a journalist's question. Security, climate, and industrial competitiveness and productivity. These are so obvious themes, you cannot avoid them. If you want to avoid them, they come on.
Not themes, goals.
Goals.
What is the utmost important goal on security?
The utmost political goal on security, again.
Or climate, or industrial.
Yeah. But I'm a pragmatic. So don't ask me to say the most important issue is to have a European army. Yes, we should have that. Then we are really a geopolitical fight. But we will not have it. Let's work much more together than we are doing now. Because sometimes I was ashamed the last months. Really ashamed. We are far from the geopolitical awareness of the Ukrainian. The big issue is not if you can sell stuff of your own factories. The most important thing is how can we help as much as possible Ukraine, because the defeat of Ukraine, whatever that really means, is not only a defeat for Europe, it's the beginning of a period that is unimaginable. We don't know what will happen afterwards. It will be a domino effect from the beginning to the end. The Green Deal is in itself a major achievement. Let's implement it. And we have to fight to get it implemented. Because we are not living in 2019 anymore, with 100,000 of young people in the streets. Now we have 100,000 of people in the streets against some parts of the Green Deal. So we keeping the Green Deal high on the agenda, making, of course, some concessions. World climate will not collapse when the introduction of electric cars is not in 2035, but in 2038 or 39. I'm not at that point an ideologue. So there's some flexibility, of course, but to keep the substance, to keep more than the direction. If the speed is a little bit slower than originally foreseen, take it, but keep the goal. And industrial competitiveness, of course, all the older among you I recall the famous book of Jean-Jacques Servan-Schreiber, Le Défi Américain. I was reading, coming from the train from Bruges, from the College of Europe, articles on our delay in many areas, our delay also in terms of productivity, not regarding China, but regarding the United States.
Yeah.
And so, but we overcome the défi américain, not immediately, but the answer to the problems of the 60s, because we had similar problems, was the single market of China. That was the answer. That was the answer. But it took too much time to get there. On the QMV and unanimity, the problem is that in order to change the rule of unanimity, you need a unanimous decision. That's the big issue. But I wonder if we have to reason in terms of either unanimity or qualified majority. You can have in between, as always. Why not saying, for instance, that one or two countries cannot block a consensus? It will not be a solution for every problem, but some problems could have a positive outcome. But again, even for that, you need a unanimous decision. But I will not focus on this. What is the best solution? No, second best is also a good one. On the European political community, frankly speaking, I have no clear view on what it is. Simply one example. In 2009, we founded the Eastern Partnership. It was considered as an empty box. It was considered as almost nothing. There were two countries in it that were on the brink of waging war, Armenia and Azerbaijan. There was one country, Belarus, was hosting what is called at that time the last dictator of Europe. So it was a very strange club. With three of them, we negotiated the association agreements, and we gave it substance. So what can start as an empty shell can have a known dynamic. Sometimes an institution, the only merit is that it exists, and that at some time you can fill in the gaps. I don't know when, I don't know why, but let's say that if there is a raison d'être, that's one of the raison d'être. The acts and the deeds. The unhappy thing in the European Union, but that is not only at the European level, is that bright ideas, great ideas, have a chance to be implemented in a time of crisis. I often said, when you have the back against the wall, the knife to the throat, and the abyss in front of you, then you become courageous. And have your long-term view. But it is not always true, but it is often true. And that's a pity. And therefore, what I'm saying now is old school boys talk. Therefore, in order to have it outside the crisis times, you need a Franco-German movement.
Yeah.
And I know that the world has changed also in the last 10 years, but they are still the two biggest economies in the European Union, half of the economy of the Eurozone still today, and I know that the economic argument is not the only argument, I know all this, but if they say, as they said in May 2020, look, we are ready on both sides to drop taboos, let's go ahead. Then it still can take 4 days and 4 nights in the European Council to get there. It's only 4 days and 4 nights. It's almost nothing. Most people have forgotten that it took that period of time. So without the agreement between Merkel and Macron in May on this package recovery fund of 500 billion of grants, it wouldn't have been possible. So when you want to go ahead in non-crisis times, you need leadership. You need leadership. And in the European Council, there is a special responsibility, still today, I think, of France and Germany. So it's a pity if it is not working well, of not working at all. But that's the gap between acts and deeds can only be covered with that initiative. If you have the Letta report, you will have the Draghi report. It should not be the outcome should not be the one of the Lisbon of the Agenda 20,000. You know what? But if there is not this impetus, this strong endorsement by two big economies, then it will end in nothing. You simply need them. The lessons learned from those 5 years, there are many lessons. And what I just was mentioning is one of those lessons. Although we took the decision of June 2012 on the banking union, which was the turning point in the crisis, without Franco-German pre-cooked agreements. We did it in the European Council. And Italy and Mario Monti played a major role. So it is possible to get agreements without France and Germany having agreed before the meeting. It is possible, but it's much more easier to do so with in their historic role. The lessons I learned, just one or two of them. I agree with Enrico when he said you have to give a bigger role also to the capitals of the member states to get them more involved. I agree with that, even if it is needed to move every 3 months to another capital, to have meetings of the European Council. But frankly speaking, the rotating presidency, we changed its role. We changed its role. It is now an implementation of the decisions made by the European Council. They should give up to play a role by themselves. And from time to time, not always, but from time to time, I see glimpses still of it. When you have to explain outside Europe what is the role of the rotating presidency, I can assure you it is already complicated. The Commission, the Council, and then what is the rotating presidency. But if they understand the role that you have to implement what was decided at the highest level, then it's okay. Then there's no problems with that. A lesson that I also learned was this idea of merging the role of President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council. It cannot work.
Yeah.
It's the end of the Commission, by the way. End of the Commission. If the President of the European Council, I put it in right, if the President of the European Commission is chairing the European Council, where is the independent role of the European Commission? Where is the long-term vision and so on? Forget all this. Forget all this. I'm not pleading for the two methods, the intergovernmental and the community and so on, but this is Europe. This is Europe. It will always be a combination of national and European interest with this special body of the European Council, where at the end of the day, they also have to defend the European cause. one of my disagreements with my good friend, late friend Jean-Luc Dehaene, who was in favor of double hatting, he managed to get it through the convention for the High Representative. I still don't see the added value. But for the Commission and the Council, I say to Jean-Luc, you think that the President of the European Commission will become the President of the European Council. But what will happen is that the President of the European Council will be the President of the European Commission. And it's just the opposite. Just the opposite. And if you don't change the competencies of those presidencies when you get them directly elected, that will be a real catastrophe. When you create huge expectations, and there is the delivery. So one of the lessons that I am drawing was there are, what do you call it, good false ideas.
No, false, I wanted to say, I'm so pleased that you finish on something which is my obsession. I fight every day against false good ideas. This is really a false good idea. Thank you very much, Herman. This was brilliant. And so I'm not going to conclude on this, but I take the privilege to make three very, very small remarks because I think they link what has been said around the table. The first one is this question of the EU level. Sometimes, historically speaking, particularly in academic circles, people were always presenting the EU level as the weak part of democracy. My personal view from having sat in the European Council for a very long time and seeing how dialogue always continues, there is far less polarization, is that luckily we have the EU level as a counterpart, where the debate is less passionate, a bit more technocratic, and based on mutual respect. There's someone in the room, he's called Jaap Hoeksma, who's written a lot about the nature of the EU. I recommend that you Google him and see, because he explains this very beautifully. Second remark is, what comes out from what Herman says all the time is, la politique c'est l'art du possible. But that does not mean, and when he was a bit pushed by Ilke and by Sophie, which I like very much, is the question is how you define le possible. And I don't think he said the possible should be not ambitious. The question is how do we make le possible a bit more ambitious, but c'est l'art du possible. And the last remark is one, whenever you're in Brussels, people say, il faut être uni. For me, that doesn't mean anything, nothing. It depends on what you're talking about. If you mean before a European Council, then my question to you is, do you really think 27 heads of state and government will come to Brussels to hold hands and say, we are beautiful people and we love each other and we are united? They come to Brussels to solve problems where they disagree, by definition. So the question of unity is one which looks very different before and after a European Council meeting. But I conclude here, so to leave time for another major challenge which Miriam will take you through, enlargement. Thank you very much indeed.